What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake Chatsky, joined as always by Paul Kilgallen. We got another draft for you guys. Football, as they say, is a three-phase game, so it wouldn't be right to do our draft series without concluding, of course, with the special teamers. Paul, how you doing? How you feeling? Getting ready to go into another one of these drafts?
I'm good. Another long holiday weekend. This one was shockingly easy to put the board together for. We had to cut a couple people out at the last minute, but like getting the names in there was like so easy, and it made me feel a little bit like a psychopath and a loser for being able to rattle off. What is this? 25 special teamers just like that, sitting down on a Wednesday. So, yeah, this is good. This is exciting.
Yeah, I got the text from you, and it just had like 30 names in order already. I was like, sweet, here we go. We did have to make some last minute honorable mention cuts. It's tough to fit 25 names in a box, especially when you have to have some level of like hierarchy. You can't just put like, oh, the five best names, because then you could build the team for $5. So you got to get some guys in there who are maybe infamous for the wrong reasons on special teams. But with that being said, Paul, you put together the board, so I'll kick it over to you. Let's run it through. We will have the graphic in the Patreon and on Twitter yet again. But just for our audio listeners, let's give them a quick rundown of the rankings going into this week.
Yeah, so we'll start off with kicker. Kicker was pretty straightforward. There've only been like five like reasonably good kickers. And, outside of putting in a punishment like a Kare Vedvik or something like that, we just kind of went with the top five kickers. So the $5 tier is Pat Leahy, $4 Nick Folk, $3 Greg Zerline, $2 John Hall, and $1 Jay Feely. That one, like I said, was pretty easy and straightforward to put together. Punter, we ended up having to drop a punter last minute. We're going to go $5 Thomas Morstead, $4 Lack Edwards, $3 Ben Graham, $2 Tom Tupa, $1 Braden Mann, and we're going to leave him out, but Steve Weatherford was originally in here. Steve Weatherford, the jacked punter who we let go to the Giants after the 9 and 10 seasons. Kick returner, Leon Washington in the top spot for $5, Joe McKnight for $4, $3 Chad Morton, $2 Leon Johnson, $1 Justin Miller. We originally had Aaron Glenn in here, and we decided to get rid of him because we had covered him pretty well in the defense episode, so we left him off. Punt returner, Santana Moss for $5, Bruce Harper for $4, Xavier Gibson for $3, Jeremy Curley for $2, and the fair catch king, Dedrick Ward, for $1. And then in the last spot here, like we were thinking special teams coach, but you really can't do that. It's just Mike Westhoff and Brant Boyer. And then like I was thinking long snapper, but you really can't do that either because that's Thomas Hennessy, Tanner Purdom, and James Darth, and like that's it, right? So we couldn't fill out the names with coaches or long snappers, so we decided to go with special teams ace because there's a lot of guys that don't play one of those specialist positions but are just important on special teams, and they're kind of memorable in the team for that reasons. And there were actually 7 or 8 guys on this list. This list was the hardest one to pare down. So at $5, we have Brad Smith, who you could argue could go in kick returner or punt returner. Chris Burkett, who actually made a Pro Bowl in the 90s, I think, as a special teams ace. Wallace Wright, wide receiver, number 15, who was on a lot of good special team units. Justin Hardy, kind of obligatory recent. And Chris Hayes, who I feel like Chris Hayes was just around the team forever. He was always kind of making plays on defense, making plays on special teams. And we left off a couple guys here. We left out Rontez Miles. Who else did we take out?
Who was the last? We
Gerald Soule,
an extra ace.
Yeah, Gerald Soule, Rontez Miles, and one more that's escaping me right now, but maybe we'll think of him later and we'll put him back on the list. But yeah, this list was fun to put together. Like I said, surprisingly
Aaron
easy.
Glenn? Did you say Aaron Glenn?
I said Aaron Glenn under the kick returners. Yeah. But yeah, so that's what we got.
It's interesting. I'm going through this and I'm thinking like, oh man, some of the punt, like the disparity in punter is a really, interesting category. But then it's also like, All right, yeah. I love Morstead. He's great, and we've seen how big of an impact he's had going from a guy like Braden Mann. But also, like, if your team has a great punter, do you have a lot of really good memories from that season? So it's an interesting exercise while we're highlighting the special team side of the ball. But it is a very, very important phase of football. So I'm excited to dive into it. But there is one thing we need to do before we dive into these drafts. Uh, which is figure out who's going first. And I feel like last time I went first, I did feel like I was on tilt the entire time. Like going second is much more comfortable, but uh the like or wait, did you go first last time? You might have gone first, right?
Yeah, I went first and took Rex last time. You
Okay,
went
yeah.
first the
You
first time and took Parcells.
when I went first, I had like a clear cut plan, but then when I was like going second, it put me. Both of us have been on tilt going
Yeah,
second. With that being said, I'm going to toss it up to you. Have you make the decision? Do you want to go first or second in this draft?
I'll go second.
Okay. I don't know that I have a clear cut number one pick.
Yeah, I feel good
Let me
about this one. I,
scan.
I put the board together, and also like there's a couple guys in here from like the '90s that I feel like you don't know too much about, so I'm going to be able
Right.
to.
Well, no, that's part of like scanning the board right now is I have to figure out like, all right, which categories am I most limited in? I think one of the number one categories I'm limited in is ace. So I'm going to spend a big chunk of my budget right now and take Brad Smith for $5. Just absolutely the definition of electric with the ball in his hands. Not only, do I now get him, if we're doing this as a trilogy, where I have my offense and my defense and my special teams after all our drafts are said and done, I'm getting him on an offense with Chad Pennington, Garrett Wilson. Like, we can do some fun things mixing him in on the offensive side of the ball, let him throw a couple. But I also love obviously his return ability. Like you said, we could slot him in as either punt returner or kick returner. So maybe I don't necessarily need to address that too heavily later in my draft. But, whenever Brad Smith was on the field, whether it was Wildcat or, kicking the ball in his direction, you knew that there was something magical that could happen on that play. So I'm fine, comfortable looking at this list and being secure in having a team with Brad Smith.
All right, I like it. Um, Brad Smith is awesome. To your point, you could put him all over the place. There's a punter on here that can also play quarterback, and you could say that about Brad Smith too. He can also play quarterback, and so you're getting a lot of versatility there with Brad Smith. You are spending $5 right out of the gate, but hey, we'll see where this goes. I am going to start with kick returner, and I am going to go with Chad Morton, I think. Chad Morton was not like, I think I had a better memory of Chad Morton than what he actually was when I looked up his stats. He had surprisingly fewer touchdowns than I remembered. But at the time that he was playing, he was only with us for a couple of years, and I think he spent a bulk of his career with the Saints after he left us. But he returned a bunch of kicks, and his average was very high. He was averaging like 25 yards a return or something. He was always putting us in good field position. He was super exciting with the ball in his hands. I think he only took 2 back for touchdowns, but he was just like a super, super exciting player. And he was one of those guys that when he was back there, you always felt dangerous. You always felt like something was going to happen. I feel like the Jets have gone long stretches in their history where the kickoff return was almost just kind of irrelevant. And there have been a couple really good guys in here, right? Brad Smith was one of them that we arguably could have had on this kick returner list. But like Leon Washington, Justin Miller, all these guys that we have on this list here were all dangerous with the ball in their hands, and you knew you were starting from a good place on the field when you had them. So I'm going to start off. I'm not going to blow my budget out. I'm going to take $3, and I'm going to take Chad Morton. And then I'm going to move over to kicker so I can make sure I lock up my points. And I'm actually going to surprise you a little bit here and go with Nick Folk. Nick Folk is a guy that we should not have let go when we did because we entered kicking Siberia for a few years right after he left. But his field goal percentage when he was with us was 82%. The guy just did not miss here. He had come off, I think he had left the Cowboys previous to that, and he had some kind of hip injury or leg injury where the Cowboys let him walk. And then he spent 6 years with us, and he was ridiculously good. He made like, I think he attempted something like 200 extra points and he only missed two. And like I said, he hit field goals at an 83% clip when he was with the Jets. Now, for comparison's sake, like Pat Leahy, who's a Hall of Fame kicker who spent, I think, like 16, 17 years with the Jets or something, he hit at a 71% rate. And for that brief period of time that Nick Folk was here for 6 years, he was hitting at an 83% rate. So I'm going to spend $4 on Nick Folk in my second pick.
Folk did not surprise me coming off the board. He was someone I was potentially targeting, but I have a backup plan, so I'm not rattled. He's like the quintessential guy that was like, why the fuck did we ever let him go? And he played in the league for several years. He played on the Pats, like after he moved on from the Jets, and especially like, we talked about not having a punishment guy on here, but the cyclical nature of the kicker position, like the absolute circus of names that we had to rotate through after Nick Folk's departure to get back to some stability, just shows you like it's one of those things you don't think about until you have to, and when you're thinking about it, it's like, what a disaster this is. So great picks, both of them coming off the board. You took kick returner and kicker, right?
Yep.
Okay, so knowing that, I'm going to. Oh, you also took punt returner initially, right?
No.
Oh
no, I had two picks. I had two picks.
Okay.
I took kick returner Chad Morton, kicker Nick Folk.
Okay. So I am going to then go over to the punt returner category just to make sure I get first dibs there, especially because I've spent a decent chunk of my budget. I'm going with Jeremy Curley for $2. A fan favorite, especially of of the shittier Jets teams of recent memory. But I looked it up. He's third all time in Jets in punt return yards. Didn't have the best, I think the Jets defenses were good, and so teams were punting a lot. Didn't have the highest yards per return. I think it was 8.9. But I think for $2, he's a good bang for my buck. I toyed with going with Gibson, but I think Curley for $1 less. Gibson just hasn't necessarily had the long-term career. Obviously, we were talking about this going into the episode. He had one very big shining moment last season, which is a good building block to start on, but I'd rather save the dollar and have Curley on my team.
Fair enough. It's a good pick. Jeremy Curley, not a sexy pick there. Like you said, he is, I think, second in yards or second or third in yards. He's up there. He's up there in the top three in yards. He had a pretty good average. He, I think, is tied for the career lead in touchdowns, or maybe he's one short of it. But the caveat here is he also returned more punts than almost everybody else except Bruce Harper on this list. So he got a ton of attempts too. He was on some teams that, there was a lot of just back and forth, right? A lot of low scoring games, a lot of punts, things like that. So not a sexy pick, but it is a good, smart pick.
Yeah. I think once I spent a lot